Jacob had always been proud of his independence. At 72, he still drove himself to the grocery store, took long evening walks with his old retriever, and read the morning newspaper without needing help. But one autumn evening, while trying to read the sports page under the warm light of his living room lamp, he noticed the words had started to blur. At first, he thought it was just fatigue, a simple sign of getting older. Yet, when the blur returned the next morning, accompanied by a dull ache behind his eyes, he felt a quiet worry begin to stir. A week later, Jacob sat in his doctor's office, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air, as he waited for the results of a routine eye exam. The doctor leaned back in his chair, voice calm but deliberate, as he said, "Jacob, your eyes are working harder than they should. There are early signs of strain, and if you're not careful, this could progress into something more serious: cataracts, macular degeneration. These conditions don't appear overnight, but they build slowly, often without warning." The words hung heavy in the room. Jacob nodded, swallowing hard, the thought of losing the ability to read or see his grandchildren's faces filling him with a quiet fear. That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He sat by his kitchen window, watching the streetlight flicker on the empty road, and thought about his father. His father had gone blind in his late 70s, and Jacob remembered the sadness in his eyes as he had to give up reading and walking alone. Jacob whispered to himself, "I don't want that to be me." It wasn't vanity, it was about holding on to the small joys that made life rich. The expression in his daughter's smile, the pages of his favorite history books, the colors of the garden he tended each spring. The next morning, Jacob decided something had to change. His doctor's words echoed in his mind, but instead of filling him with despair, they became a challenge. What if I can strengthen my eyes before it's too late, he thought. He began researching foods, habits, and small choices that could nourish his vision. What he discovered surprised him. Simple, everyday foods, the kind he had often overlooked, were quietly holding the power to protect his eyes and restore some of the sharpness he feared losing. At first, he made small adjustments. He swapped his usual breakfast toast for something richer in color and nutrients. He filled his grocery basket with items he had once walked past without a second glance. Slowly, Jacob began to notice the difference. The ache in his eyes lessened, and the fatigue he felt while reading at night seemed to ease. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it was something steady, something that gave him hope. And with each passing week, his confidence returned. As Jacob's story unfolded, it became clear that the journey wasn't about fighting old age, it was about living with it wisely. He didn't need to surrender to fear or to the slow fading of his vision. Instead, by leaning into small but powerful changes, he found a way to keep the world vivid and alive. And it's this very path, one rooted in both science and the simple gifts of nature, that we'll walk together now. Because the truth is, protecting your eyes isn't about waiting for illness to arrive. It's about opening your eyes today to what can still be saved. Jacob's days had always followed a rhythm: morning coffee, a slow walk with his retriever, then an hour or two with the newspaper spread across the oak kitchen table. But in the weeks after his doctor's warning, that rhythm began to feel fragile. Words blurred on the page, street signs seemed dimmer than he remembered, and in the evenings, the colors of his garden lost their brilliance. He tried to shrug it off, telling himself it was just age, yet a quiet fear lingered. Jacob had seen what happened to his father, how blindness had robbed him of small freedoms, and he could not shake the image of himself stumbling in that same darkness. It was Jacob's daughter, Emily, who noticed first. One Sunday afternoon, as he squinted to read the hymn numbers in church, she leaned over and whispered, "Dad, maybe you should sit closer." Jacob smiled and waved her off, but later that night, when he fumbled to find his keys under the porch light, Emily's worried glance returned to him. That glance stung more than any symptom, because it was laced with love, with unspoken fear, with the memory of her grandfather's decline. Jacob went to bed restless, the shadows of doubt crowding him more than the darkness of the room. The next morning, Jacob stood in front of his kitchen counter, staring at the usual loaf of white bread he toasted each day. His doctor's words came back. "Your eyes are working harder than they should." He remembered reading somewhere that food could feed the eyes, though he had dismissed it as magazine fluff. Now, with his vision trembling at the edges, he wasn't so sure. He picked up a bag of carrots his neighbor had left from her garden, their bright orange color almost glowing under the sunlight. For the first time in years, Jacob sliced them, not for the stew he used to cook in winter, but to eat raw, crisp, and unseasoned. As he chewed, he thought about how something so ordinary could carry such weight. Later that week, he mentioned it to his doctor during a follow-up visit. The doctor, a gray-haired man not much younger than Jacob himself, smiled warmly. "You know, Jacob, those carrots are full of beta-carotene. Your body turns that into vitamin A, which your eyes use to stay sharp, especially at night. It's not a cure, but it's like giving your vision the fuel it needs." The way he said it felt less like science and more like a blessing, like a small torch being lit in the fog of Jacob's fear. That evening, Jacob shared the story with Emily over dinner. She laughed, shaking her head. "Dad, I never thought I'd see you crunching carrots like a kid with a lunchbox." Jacob grinned but grew quiet, his voice softening. "It's strange, Emily. I always thought of food as just food, but now every bite feels like a choice, like I'm either fighting for my eyes or surrendering them." Emily reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Then keep fighting, Dad. I want you to see my kids grow up. I want you to see everything." Her words echoed in him long after she left that night. Sitting alone in his armchair, Jacob picked up his favorite novel and, for the first time in weeks, didn't struggle as much under the lamp's glow. Maybe it was imagination, maybe it was the comfort of hope. But something shifted inside him. He realized this wasn't just about carrots or vitamins, it was about reclaiming control, about choosing life over slow surrender. Jacob began keeping a small bowl of carrots on his counter, slicing them into salads, grating them into soup, even juicing them on mornings when he felt adventurous. Each act became a ritual, a gentle rebellion against the quiet fear of blindness. And though he knew one vegetable couldn't save him from time, the act of choosing it each day lit a spark of strength he hadn't felt in years. In that spark, Jacob sensed the beginning of something larger. He wasn't just feeding his body, he was feeding his will to keep seeing, to keep living. The road ahead would not be easy, but as he looked at the bright orange slices in his hand, he felt a truth settling deep inside him. Sometimes the smallest choices carry the greatest power. Jacob's mornings soon felt lighter, not only because of the carrots on his plate, but also because of the hope he carried with him. Still, a question lingered in his mind. What else could he do? Carrots were a start, but he wanted more than a symbolic gesture. He wanted to know that every small choice truly counted, that each meal wasn't just filling his stomach, but also protecting his eyes. That desire pulled him back to the grocery store one Saturday morning, basket in hand, scanning the shelves as if each item hid a secret he had yet to uncover. He stopped in front of the dairy section, staring at rows of eggs stacked neatly in cartons. He hadn't paid them much attention before, buying them only for the occasional breakfast fry-up. But today, something about their simplicity called to him. He picked up a carton, remembering how his wife, before she passed, used to insist on eggs every morning. "They'll keep you strong," she used to say, sliding a soft-boiled egg onto his plate with a smile. The memory brought a pang of longing, but also a quiet warmth, as though she were nudging him toward the answer even now. That afternoon, Jacob boiled 2 eggs and sat at his kitchen table, cracking the shells slowly, watching the soft steam curl into the air. He hesitated before the first bite, almost laughing at himself. Could something so ordinary really matter? But as he ate, he thought again of his doctor's words. The body always needs fuel, and the right fuel can make all the difference. The golden yolk glistened, rich and comforting, and Jacob felt as though he were feeding not just his hunger, but a fragile hope inside him. At his next appointment, Jacob mentioned the eggs to his doctor, almost shyly. The older man nodded with approval. "Egg yolks, Jacob, are like treasure for the eyes. They hold lutein and zeaxanthin, compounds that settle right in the retina, right in the macula, where you need sharp central vision. They're like natural shields, protecting your eyes from the blue light of screens, from the wear and tear of age. And the fats in the yolk, they help your body absorb it all. Keep at it." The way the doctor said it, calm, assured, like a man speaking to family, gave Jacob a sense of quiet authority he could lean on. Days turned into weeks, and eggs became part of his rhythm. He learned to enjoy them in small, simple ways, scrambled with a little pepper, sliced onto toast, stirred gently into fried rice. Each preparation felt like a new path back to clarity. He noticed something subtle but steady. The glare of headlights during his evening drives didn't blind him quite as sharply. The words on the page, though not as crisp as in his youth, no longer blurred with the same stubbornness. Was it the eggs, or was it the feeling of purpose that came with them? Jacob didn't care. What mattered was that something was shifting. Emily noticed too. One evening, while visiting with her two children, she leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing as she studied him. "Dad, you don't squint at the television as much anymore." Jacob chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe I've just memorized the actors' faces." But inside, he knew the truth. Something real was happening, something worth holding on to. Later that night, Jacob sat alone with a cup of tea, reflecting on how such a humble food had become a symbol of resilience. He realized he had always underestimated the power of daily habits, of those small, repeating choices that slowly shaped the body and spirit. Eggs weren't magic, but they were a reminder that strength could be rebuilt, that even in his 70s, he could still fight back against decline. For Jacob, the eggs became more than nutrition. They became a quiet ritual, a way to honor his wife's memory, a way to keep faith with his daughter's hope, and a way to remind himself that his story wasn't over yet. Each golden yolk whispered a promise of clarity, and with every bite, Jacob believed a little more in the possibility of seeing life's details, faces, words, colors, with fresh eyes. And so, as he cleared the table and turned off the lights, Jacob carried with him not just the taste of eggs, but the glow of determination. His vision might have faltered, but his resolve was sharpening. The road ahead still stretched long and uncertain, but Jacob now walked it with a steadier step, guided by the quiet strength of ordinary foods turned extraordinary allies. By early spring, Jacob's kitchen had changed. The counter that once held only bread, butter, and a jar of instant coffee now looked like a painter's palette. Orange carrots stacked neatly in a bowl, a carton of eggs resting by the stove, and a basket of fruit waiting to be washed. Yet it was the fruit that caught his attention most often. On a chilly morning walk through the local farmer's market, Jacob stopped at a stand overflowing with blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries. Their colors seemed deeper than anything he'd noticed in years, as if the world itself was urging him to see what he had almost lost. He picked up a small carton of blueberries, the skin cool and firm under his fingers. The vendor, a woman about his daughter's age, smiled at him. "Good for the eyes, you know," she said casually. Jacob raised an eyebrow, surprised by her choice of words. "The eyes?" She nodded. "Anthocyanins. That's what gives them their color. Helps fight the stress your eyes go through every day." He bought 2 cartons, not just because of her words, but because for the first time in weeks, he felt that the universe was whispering the same message from every direction. That evening, Jacob poured the blueberries into a small bowl and sat by the window as the sun dipped low. He ate them slowly, each one bursting with a tart sweetness that lingered on his tongue. The simplicity of it struck him. These little berries, so fragile in the hand, were carrying a strength his body needed. He remembered his doctor's voice again, talking about oxidative stress and inflammation. But tonight, he didn't hear it as a warning. He heard it as reassurance. He wasn't powerless. Not anymore. Within weeks, Jacob made berries part of his daily rhythm. He sprinkled them on his morning oats, blended them into a cool smoothie on warmer afternoons, and kept a handful nearby for evening snacking. Emily teased him once, laughing, "Dad, you're eating like a teenager with all these smoothies." Jacob only smiled, replying, "Maybe it's time I started taking lessons from the young again." But beneath the laughter, Emily could see it. Her father's eyes looked less weary, more alive, as if light had found its way back into them. One Sunday, Jacob's grandchildren visited, their hands sticky with strawberry jam. They climbed onto his lap with their picture books, pointing to the bright illustrations. For the first time in months, Jacob didn't struggle to follow along. The colors were sharper, the outlines clearer. He read each page without pausing to rub his eyes. His granddaughter looked up at him, her face wide with delight. "Grandpa, you're reading so fast." The words filled him with more strength than any medicine could provide. That night, as Jacob sat in his armchair, he thought about resilience. It wasn't about resisting age, no one could. It was about feeding the body enough strength to keep going, enough color to fight the gray. These berries had become more than food. They were symbols of renewal, reminders that even fragile things could hold immense power. The thought soothed him, eased the tightness in his chest that had lingered ever since the doctor's warning. When he met with his doctor again, he shared the story. The old man smiled knowingly. "Those anthocyanins are like tiny shields, Jacob. They help your eyes withstand the stress of time. Keep them in your diet. They're a sweet ally." Jacob nodded, realizing that each food he discovered wasn't just nourishment, it was another piece of armor, another step toward reclaiming his vision. He left the office that day feeling lighter, as though the weight of fear had shifted into something more manageable. Yes, his eyes were aging. Yes, there were risks ahead. But he no longer felt like a man standing helpless against the tide. He felt like a sailor adjusting his sails, steering himself through storm and sun alike. As he set the blueberries back on his counter that evening, Jacob whispered to himself, "I'm not finished yet." And with that, he took another bite, savoring the sweetness, savoring the resilience it symbolized. The world outside Jacob's window was slowly shifting into spring, the gray of winter giving way to bursts of color. For Jacob, that change mirrored what was happening inside his own life. The haze that had once dulled his vision seemed to be lifting little by little, as though his eyes were learning to catch the light again. But there were still moments, like when headlights glared too sharply at night or when a shadow blurred on the page, that reminded him how fragile this newfound hope could be. It was during one of those evenings, fumbling with the labels on his prescription bottles, that Jacob realized he needed more than resilience. He needed protection. On his next trip to the farmer's market, his gaze was caught by a stand overflowing with bell peppers. Red, yellow, and orange, they glistened under the morning sun like jewels waiting to be claimed. Jacob hesitated, remembering how little attention he'd given them in the past. His late wife had loved cooking with them, stuffed peppers, roasted slices over pasta, but Jacob had always brushed them aside, preferring simpler meals. Now, standing before their brightness, he felt a tug in his chest, as though those colors held something his body was aching for. He bought a bag full and carried them home, their weight surprisingly comforting in his hands. That evening, he cut into one, the crisp snap echoing through his quiet kitchen. The scent was fresh, almost sweet, and when he sautéed the slices with a little olive oil, the colors glowed against the pan. Sitting down to eat, Jacob thought of his wife again, of the meals she used to place before him with gentle insistence. For the first time, he tasted not just food, but memory, and with it, a new kind of strength. A few days later, Jacob mentioned the peppers to his doctor. The old man's eyes lit up. Now those, Jacob, are full of vitamin C, beta-carotene, even vitamin E. Think of them as tiny shields for your eyes, defending against the slow wear of age. They strengthen your blood vessels, keep inflammation at bay, and protect against cataracts. And the colors, they're not just pretty, they're nature's signposts, telling you what's inside. The way he spoke made Jacob feel as though he were gathering weapons for a long but winnable battle. Jacob didn't keep this discovery to himself. The following weekend, Emily visited with her children, and he served them roasted bell peppers alongside their meal. The children wrinkled their noses at first, but after a bite, their faces softened with surprise. Emily laughed. "Dad, you've turned into a chef. What's gotten into you?" Jacob smiled, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Just learning to protect what matters." He didn't explain further, but Emily saw the clarity in his eyes, the quiet determination that hadn't been there months before. As the weeks passed, bell peppers became a regular guest at Jacob's table. He ate them raw with hummus in the afternoon, roasted them for dinner, and even slipped slices into omelets alongside his eggs. Each meal felt like a layer of protection, like building a wall brick by brick against the uncertainty of the future. And slowly, he noticed the changes. Fewer moments of strain, less redness in his eyes after long days, and a newfound ease when reading under softer light. But perhaps the greatest change wasn't in his vision, it was in his spirit. The peppers, bright and bold, reminded him daily that age didn't mean surrender. Their colors filled his kitchen with energy, their taste stirred old memories of love and warmth, and their nourishment reminded him that he was not powerless. He could protect himself. He could choose life in full color, even when the shadows of decline threatened to dim it. One evening, as Jacob stood at his sink rinsing a red pepper, he caught his reflection in the window. The man staring back wasn't the same one who had once sat in fear after a doctor's warning. His eyes might not be perfect, but they held something stronger than clarity. They held resolve. And as he sliced into the pepper, the bright red pieces scattering across the cutting board, he whispered, almost as if to his wife's memory, "I'm still here, and I'm still seeing." The weeks rolled by, and Jacob's table grew more colorful, his meals more deliberate. Still, there were nights when his eyes burned with fatigue, the kind of dry, sandy ache that no amount of blinking could wash away. It was worst in the evenings when he tried to read under the lamp or follow the news on television. He would rub his eyes, sighing, and sometimes close the book altogether, frustrated by the simple act of trying to see. It was in those moments that doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps he was only delaying the inevitable. Emily noticed his weariness one evening when she stopped by with a basket of groceries. As she unpacked, she pulled out a piece of salmon wrapped neatly in butcher paper. "Thought you might like this," she said with a smile. "Fish is good for you, Dad. Omega-3s or something like that." Jacob chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You sound like the doctor now." But later that night, as he unwrapped the salmon and placed it on the pan, the faint, salty scent filled his kitchen with memories of summer trips to the coast. He could almost hear the waves and taste the briny air, a reminder of simpler days when life felt endless and strong. When he brought the fish to his doctor a week later in conversation, the man leaned forward with approval. "Jacob, salmon and sardines, even tuna, these are some of the best allies for your eyes. The omega-3s in them keep your retina strong and moist. They ease the discomfort of dry eyes and protect the delicate tissues from inflammation. Think of them as oil for the gears. Without it, everything grinds down faster." Jacob nodded slowly, realizing that the ache he had been carrying might not be inevitable after all. The first time he sat down to a meal of salmon and vegetables, he ate slowly, savoring the rich, buttery flavor. It felt indulgent, almost like a luxury, yet knowing what it was doing for him gave it a deeper sweetness. Within a few weeks, he noticed the difference. The sting in his eyes softened, the dryness less frequent. Reading at night no longer ended with him rubbing his eyes raw, and when he drove home under the glare of streetlights, he felt steadier, less distracted by the strain. It wasn't magic, but it was comfort he hadn't thought possible at his age. One Sunday, Jacob invited Emily and her children for dinner. He grilled fish in the backyard, the scent curling into the evening air, mingling with laughter and conversation. As the children chased each other across the lawn, Emily sat beside him with a glass of iced tea. She studied him for a moment and said softly, "Dad, you seem lighter." Jacob smiled, flipping the fish carefully. "Maybe it's just the salt air in my imagination, or maybe I'm finally learning how to take care of myself." Emily squeezed his arm gently. "Whatever it is, keep going. I like seeing you this way." That night, after the dishes were cleared and the house quiet again, Jacob sat by the window with a small book in his hands. He read until the words began to blur, not from exhaustion this time, but simply because it was late and his body needed rest. He closed the book, and instead of frustration, he felt gratitude. Gratitude for the ocean's gift, for the softening of pain, for the comfort of knowing he could still fight back in his own quiet way. Fish became more than a food to him. It became a ritual of care. Each bite reminded him that healing wasn't about grand gestures, but about persistence, about choosing comfort where once there had been only struggle. And as he prepared another fillet for the next day, Jacob thought of the ocean waves again, endless, steady, resilient. Perhaps his life, too, could carry that same rhythm. He didn't need to see perfectly. He only needed to see enough to keep walking forward, eyes open, heart steady. By the time summer arrived, Jacob's kitchen had become a place of renewal. Bowls of carrots, cartons of eggs, baskets of berries, and bright peppers sat side by side, waiting for him each day. The fillets of salmon he cooked weekly had eased the sting in his eyes, and his evenings no longer ended in the same frustration. Yet, even with all these changes, Jacob sometimes wondered if he was doing enough. Could a handful of foods really turn the tide of aging, or was he simply buying himself a little more time? One afternoon, as he strolled through the market, his gaze fell on a modest stall with glass jars filled to the brim with nuts and seeds. Almonds, walnuts, sunflower seeds, tiny chia seeds that sparkled like black sand. They looked so ordinary compared to the bright peppers and berries. Still, something about their quiet presence drew him closer. The vendor, an older woman with kind eyes, noticed his hesitation. "These little ones," she said, holding up a scoop of walnuts, "carry more strength than you'd think. Good for the heart, good for the eyes. They don't shout, but they do their work." Jacob bought a small bag, almost as an afterthought, not realizing he had just discovered the final piece of his journey. That evening, he poured a handful of walnuts into a small bowl and sat by the window, the late sun stretching long shadows across his kitchen floor. He cracked one open and chewed slowly, surprised by the depth of flavor. The texture was rough, grounding, as though each bite anchored him to something steady. Unlike the sweetness of berries or the brightness of peppers, the nuts carried a quiet dignity. They didn't dazzle, they reassured. When Jacob mentioned them to his doctor at his next checkup, the man nodded with approval. Vitamin E, Jacob. It protects the delicate cells in your eyes from wear and tear. And zinc, don't forget that. It keeps the retina strong, helps you see when the light is dim. Think of nuts and seeds as steady companions. They may be small, but they give your body the quiet strength to keep going. The word settled into Jacob like a promise. He no longer felt like he was scrambling for answers. He was building a foundation, brick by brick, meal by meal. Jacob began sprinkling chia seeds into his morning yogurt, tossing sunflower seeds onto salads, and carrying a small tin of almonds in his pocket for afternoon walks. Emily laughed the first time she saw it. "Dad, you've turned into a health nut. Literally." He chuckled, slipping a walnut into his mouth. "Maybe so, but these little things are keeping me going." What he didn't say, but felt deeply, was how these foods had become more than nutrients. They were daily reminders that even the smallest choices could hold the power to protect what mattered most. One evening, his grandchildren climbed onto his lap again, picture books in hand. As he read, the words held steady on the page, his voice strong and sure. He looked down at their eager faces, at the bright colors of the illustrations, and felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Not from strain, but from gratitude. Months ago, he had feared losing this, these simple moments, these small joys. Now, thanks to carrots and eggs, berries and peppers, fish and seeds, he had reclaimed them. Jacob's story was never about curing age or turning back the clock. It was about resilience, about quiet strength, about refusing to surrender without a fight. Each food, each change had carried him further along that path. And as he stood in his kitchen one warm evening, a bowl of seeds resting on the counter, he whispered to himself, "I'm not powerless, not anymore." The night settled softly outside, and Jacob closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet. He wasn't looking for miracles anymore. He was looking for enough light to keep seeing, enough strength to keep moving, enough hope to keep living. And in that, he had found something even greater than vision: peace. Jacob's story began with fear, the fear of blurred words on a page, of headlights that cut too sharply at night, of a doctor's quiet warning that his vision could fade. He could have surrendered to that fear, letting age dictate the rest of his days. But instead, he chose small changes, one after another. A carrot on his plate, a boiled egg in the morning, a bowl of berries by the window. Simple choices, yet each one became a turning point. Over time, those choices transformed more than his eyes. They transformed his spirit. The man who once sat in quiet worry now walked with renewed purpose. The colors of peppers brightened his meals, the comfort of fish eased his tired eyes, and the quiet strength of nuts and seeds reminded him daily that power can be found in the smallest of things. Jacob's journey wasn't about erasing age, it was about embracing life with wisdom, one nourishing step at a time. And perhaps that is the lesson for all of us. We can't stop the years from passing, but we can choose how we meet them. We can choose to fill our tables with foods that protect us, to honor the bodies that carry us, and to fight gently but persistently for the joys that matter most. Reading a story to a grandchild, seeing the smile of someone we love, watching the colors of a garden bloom each spring. So tonight, as you sit at your own table, let Jacob's story remind you that it's never too late to begin. Vision, like life, is a gift worth protecting. One choice, one meal, one moment at a time. And may you always see the world in all its beauty, with eyes that remain open and a heart that stays full.